A park in Texas, a hospital in Alabama, a house outside Nashville. 3 people, 3 different nights. The same thing found all of them. In the woods, a flute started playing at 3 a.m. No one was there, but the sound kept circling them, getting closer every time they tried to run. In the hospital, a night worker saw an old man riding the elevator. Security camera footage showed the elevator moving. Nobody was inside it. In the house, a woman came home to her basement door open. A voice spoke from the dark below. Police searched it twice, found nothing, but told her they heard knocking from the inside. Same marks, same sound, same feeling of being watched. It doesn't need a location, it only needs one thing: a moment when you're alone and listening. Story: The Flute in the Woods. This happened when I was 18 years old, during the first strange months when the world suddenly stopped because of the pandemic. I'm 22 now, and I still live in San Antonio, Texas. Back then, my high school had just shut down. Everything was locked down, and everyone was supposed to stay inside. But the truth is, my friends and I were doing the opposite. With school closed and nothing open, we had way too much free time, and we spent most of it driving around at night looking for places to explore. Urban exploration had always been my thing. Abandoned buildings, empty parks, forgotten tunnels, places most people avoided were the places I was always curious about. I'd had some weird experiences before. Once I ran into a group of squatters living inside an abandoned factory. Another time, someone actually pointed a gun at me when I accidentally wandered too close to a drug house. Those situations were dangerous, sure, but they always felt real and explainable. What happened that night in the woods didn't feel explainable. Around that time, I had started talking to a girl from one of my classes named Clarissa. We weren't officially dating yet, but we had been hanging out a lot. One night, after texting for a while, I somehow convinced her to come exploring with me. Looking back, I'm still surprised she agreed. At around 3 in the morning, we drove to a natural park in San Antonio called O.P. Schnabel Park. During the day, it's actually a really nice place. Families walking dogs, people biking on the trails, kids playing near the creek. But at night, the entire area becomes completely different. The trees grow so thick that they block almost all the moonlight. Once you step deep into the trails, the darkness becomes heavy, almost physical, like you're walking inside a tunnel made of shadows. Normally, the park entrances are locked at night because of previous crimes that happened there. Years earlier, a woman had been murdered in those woods, and there had been other violent incidents since then. But I knew a place where the fence had been bent open just enough to slip through. Clarissa stayed quiet as we climbed through. "Are you sure this is safe?" she whispered. I told her not to worry. I'd explored plenty of places like this before, but even as I said that, something about the air felt wrong. The woods were too quiet. No insects, no wind, no distant traffic, just silence. We started walking down the main trail, moving slowly so our eyes could adjust to the darkness. I didn't like using flashlights unless I absolutely had to. When your flashlight is on, you can only see what's inside the beam, but when your eyes adjust to the dark, you start noticing shapes, movement, and depth. We walked for maybe 15 minutes. Clarissa stayed close behind me the whole time. "Why does it feel like we're the only people on Earth right now?" she asked quietly. I was about to answer when something strange happened. At first, I thought it was wind moving through branches. Then the sound became clearer, soft, rhythmic, a flute. Somewhere deep in the woods, someone was playing a flute. The sound floated through the trees in slow, haunting notes. The melody was strange, not random, but not a song I recognized either. It sounded almost ancient, like something from another country or another century. Clarissa grabbed my arm instantly. "Do you hear that?" I nodded slowly. The strange thing wasn't just that someone was playing a flute at 3 in the morning in the middle of the woods. The strange thing was how close it sounded, like whoever was playing it was standing only a few yards away. And yet, we couldn't see anyone. The melody continued, calm and steady, echoing softly through the darkness. Clarissa began whispering prayers under her breath. I laughed nervously at first, trying to act brave, but after about 15 seconds, something changed. The flute got louder, much louder, and the sound no longer felt like it was coming from one direction. It felt like it was moving, slowly circling us through the trees. That's when I realized something that made my stomach drop. The melody hadn't changed. It was the exact same sequence of notes, repeating over and over and over again, like whoever or whatever was playing it had been practicing that same haunting tune for a very long time. The melody continued drifting through the trees, slow and hollow, like the sound was sliding between the trunks instead of traveling through open air. Clarissa's grip on my arm tightened so hard it actually hurt. I could feel her trembling. "Let's go back," she whispered. I was about to agree when the flute stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the music itself. For a few seconds, there was absolutely nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement in the woods, just the quiet darkness pressing in from every direction. Then the flute started again, but this time it was closer, not just closer, right next to us. Clarissa gasped. "Oh my God, do you hear that?" I did. The notes sounded so near that I instinctively turned my head, expecting to see someone standing beside us in the trees. But there was nothing, only black silhouettes of branches. And yet the sound continued, perfectly clear. The melody was strange. It had a rhythm like a cheerful dance song, something you'd expect to hear at a festival or a parade, but the way it echoed through the empty woods twisted it into something deeply unsettling, like someone was playing a happy tune at the wrong time and the wrong place. Clarissa started crying quietly. "Please, let's go. Please." That snapped me out of it. "Okay," I said quickly. "We're leaving." There was a smaller trail nearby that curved back toward the parking area where my truck was parked. It was darker than the main path, surrounded by thicker forest, but it was the fastest way out. We turned and started walking quickly down the off-road trail. The flute continued behind us. The same melody, the same repeating notes, but something else had changed. The music wasn't behind us anymore. It was everywhere. The sound bounced through the woods like invisible speakers hidden in the trees. Every direction felt wrong. Every direction felt watched. We had only been on that smaller trail for maybe 2 minutes when something exploded out of the darkness in front of us. Bushes snapped, leaves scattered, something large dashed across the trail. Clarissa screamed. I froze for a split second, expecting to see a deer or a large animal sprinting past us, but I didn't see anything. Not a shadow, not a silhouette, nothing. The only thing I felt was a sudden rush of wind against my legs as something massive crossed the trail just inches in front of us. Then it was gone. No footsteps running away, no crashing through bushes, just silence again. Clarissa grabbed my shirt, shaking violently. "We have to leave right now." We both turned and sprinted back toward the main trail. The moment our feet hit the pavement again, the flute started playing, loud, clear, right on top of us. It sounded like whoever was playing it had been standing exactly where we were seconds earlier, but when we spun around, there was still nobody there. The music continued for another few seconds. Then it stopped completely, not slowly, not fading away, just cut off, like someone had suddenly lowered the instrument. Clarissa whispered, "It's watching us." I didn't respond, because deep down, I had started thinking the same thing. We ran down the main trail as fast as we could. What normally would have been a 20-minute walk turned into maybe 7 minutes of pure adrenaline. Halfway down the path, we passed a random porta potty near the edge of the woods. I remember staring at it as we ran past, terrified that someone might suddenly step out of it. But the door was closed. No lights, no sound. Eventually the trees thinned and we reached the parking area. My truck was the only vehicle there. We jumped inside and I immediately started the engine. As we drove away, Clarissa kept staring out the back window. I asked her what she was looking at. She didn't answer for a moment. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. "Did you hear it again?" "Hear what?" "The flute." I shook my head. "I didn't hear anything." Clarissa's voice dropped to a whisper. "It started playing again when we got in the truck." I looked back at the dark road disappearing behind us. The woods were already far away, but Clarissa kept staring. Then she said something I still think about all the time. It wasn't coming from the park anymore. I glanced at her. Where was it coming from? Her eyes were wide with fear. It sounded like... She swallowed slowly. It was coming from inside the truck. Story 2. The Man in 5512. 2 weeks after the flute night, I tried to laugh it off. Clarissa wouldn't. She stopped answering my "let's go exploring" texts, and whenever I brought up the park, her face would go blank, like she didn't want her brain to replay it. I didn't blame her. I told myself it was probably some weirdo with a speaker or a guy messing with people for fun. Still, the part that didn't fit was what she said in the truck, that the music sounded like it was inside with us. I kept telling myself she was panicking, that fear can distort memory. Then I heard about what happened to a guy online, an Alabama hospital night shift story. One of those posts that gets shared in late-night threads. Normally I'd scroll past it, but one detail stuck out. A sound that shouldn't exist inside a locked place, and a figure that showed up like a glitch in reality. It didn't feel like a ghost story. It felt like something wrong with the rules. A couple months later, I made a friend through a mutual Discord server. Caleb, same age as me. He worked nights in a medium-sized hospital in northwest Alabama as a pharmacy tech, stocking surgery rooms and doing those late deliveries to nurse stations. He was the kind of guy who didn't try to sound dramatic. When he finally told me what happened on one of his shifts, he kept apologizing like he was wasting my time. He wasn't. It started on a Wednesday night near the end of his 7-day stretch. He'd been awake for what he estimated was around 38 hours, running on energy drinks and stubbornness because he didn't trust himself to drive. His wife was dropping him off and picking him up. He told me the hospital at night had a specific kind of quiet, not peaceful quiet, more like a building holding its breath. That night, he was stocking the surgery rooms, earbuds in, moving from Omnicell to Omnicell. Surgery areas always felt empty, he said, but it was a familiar emptiness, sterile, controlled, predictable. Then a door opened behind him. He heard the squeal of hinges, the heavy wooden thump when it closed, and he automatically turned around, like you do when you've been working nights long enough that you recognize people by their footsteps. No one was there. He shrugged it off. Maybe someone opened it, saw him, and left. Maybe it didn't even latch fully and swung shut. He went back to stocking. The tired part of his brain tried to file it under normal. A few minutes later, he pushed his cart into the next room. The lights were off. That wasn't unusual either. Some rooms were kept dark when not in use. He opened the door, stepped in, and for just a second, just a blink, he saw someone hunched near the sharps bin, digging through it. If you've never seen a sharps bin, it's not like a normal trash can. It's where used needles go. It's not something a normal person reaches into unless they're either desperate or out of their mind. Caleb said his first thought was, not again. Apparently, someone had been caught before, stealing discarded vials, looking for narcotics residue. The hospital fired them. There were warnings posted. Security was supposed to keep an eye out, so he flicked the light on, ready to snap at whoever it was. The room was empty. No movement, no footsteps running away, no door closing, nothing. He stood there longer than he meant to, listening for any sound of someone hiding. His skin prickled, but he told himself he was exhausted. Sleep deprivation does weird things. He kept repeating that like a prayer. You're just tired. You're just tired. He finished stocking without any more sightings and went back to the pharmacy around 2 a.m. That's when he did the med deliveries floor by floor. He described the 5th floor layout to me in a way that made it easy to picture. Elevators in the center, left side split into 5,100/5,200 wings, right side split into 5,400/5,500 wings. The 5,455 side was under remodeling, so some floors were quieter than normal. The remodeled wing on 5 was supposed to be empty. No nurses, no patients, just long halls and rooms with doors cracked open. He told me he shouldn't have walked over there. He said he didn't even have a reason. Curiosity maybe. Something about being that tired makes you do dumb stuff, like your brain wants stimulation just to stay awake. He pushed through the doors into the empty wing and immediately felt it. Not a ghost vibe, not a chill, something more physical. The air felt wrong, like the temperature wasn't stable, like a cold draft that didn't come from vents. The hallway was lit in that dim overnight hospital glow. Patient room doors lined the sides. Most were shut. A few were open just enough to show darkness inside. As he walked down the 55 side, he heard a rattling noise. At first he thought it was construction equipment settling or a loose bed frame tapping. Then he passed room 5512, and the noise became frantic, like metal shaking violently. He glanced through the doorway and saw an old man in the bed convulsing hard, blood running from his eyes and mouth, a monitor flashing with that rapid panicked beeping you only hear in medical dramas and real emergencies. The man's jaw was working like he was trying to breathe through liquid. Caleb told me his body reacted before his brain did. He stepped backward, half behind the door frame, because the sight was so shocking it hit him like a punch. Then his training kicked in. Get help, call a nurse, do something. He stepped back in. The bed was made, perfectly made, no patient, no blood, no monitor sound. The monitor was off and dusted over like it hadn't been touched in a day. The room smelled like nothing at all. No iron, no disinfectant, no sweat, just stale emptiness. Caleb stood there staring, waiting for reality to correct itself. He expected the old man to appear again, like it was some trick of shadows and exhaustion. Nothing changed. He backed out and walked faster toward the elevators, telling himself he was hallucinating. He told himself that over and over because the alternative was too stupid to believe. He got to the elevator bank and hit the button. The doors opened almost immediately, and an old man stepped in, not a patient. This man wore a security shirt and a hospital badge. He moved slowly, like his joints were stiff. When he passed Caleb, he patted his shoulder, casual, friendly, like a co-worker saying, "Long night, huh?" Caleb said his whole body went cold, because it was the same face he'd seen convulsing in 5512. Same deep-set eyes, same slack mouth, same shape of hands. The old man smiled, just a thin, polite smile, then turned and faced the doors as they closed. Caleb didn't press any button. He was already on the first floor when the doors opened, but the old man's presence made the elevator feel like it was moving without anyone controlling it. The display above the doors climbed, 2, 3, 4. The doors stayed shut. The elevator went up. Caleb stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the numbers. A moment later, the same elevator came back down by itself, like it was answering a call no one made. The doors slid open, empty. No old man, no footsteps, just the faint smell of something metallic and old, like a penny held too long in your palm. Caleb ran back into the pharmacy and sat in a chair until his shift ended, hands shaking, trying not to look like he was losing it. He told himself he'd been awake too long. He Googled when hallucinations start. He found the same thing you'd find. Sleep deprivation can cause visual and auditory distortions after long periods awake. It should have been enough. It wasn't, because when his wife picked him up, he walked out to her car and looked up, without meaning to, at the 5th floor windows on the remodeled side. From the 1st floor, you can see the end window of that wing if you stand at the right angle. He saw a silhouette in the 5th floor window, an old man, standing perfectly still, watching him. And even from that distance, Caleb said he knew it was the same one, because the face was close to the glass, pale in the interior darkness, like it wanted him to be certain. He got into the car without speaking. His wife asked if he was okay. He said yes, but he didn't sleep right for days because every time he closed his eyes, he heard the elevator chime. Not in his head, in the house. A soft, single ding that would come from somewhere deep inside the walls, like a building announcing a door opening on an empty floor. He told himself it was stress. Then one night, he woke up to a sound that felt like a hand sliding down glass, and he realized he didn't know if the old man had ever been in that hospital, or if the hospital had been inside him. Story 3. The Voice from the Basement. The third story didn't come from the internet. It came from someone I actually knew. Her name is Melissa. She's a friend of my girlfriend's cousin, and until the night she told this story at a small get-together, she had never shared it publicly. She said the strangest part wasn't what happened. It was the feeling that whatever had entered her house that weekend never fully left. Melissa lived with her boyfriend in a quiet neighborhood outside Nashville. The houses were nice but not huge, mostly single-story homes with small yards and a lot of trees. Their street curved in a way that made the houses feel isolated from each other, almost like each property sat in its own little pocket of silence. At the end of the street, there was a small wooded area. Melissa had always liked that about the place. During the day, it made the neighborhood feel peaceful. At night, it made it feel hidden. One weekend, her boyfriend flew to Las Vegas for a bachelor party. She was alone in the house from Thursday to Monday. The first night was normal. The second night was when things started getting strange. Melissa had invited a few friends over for wine and movies. Around midnight, they were all sitting in the living room watching a horror film when the doorbell rang. The sound made everyone jump, not because doorbells are scary, but because the timing felt almost scripted. Melissa walked to the door and looked through the small glass panel at the top. No one was there. She opened the door slightly and stepped outside onto the porch. Still, no one. Her friends laughed it off. Someone probably ran up, rang the bell, and hid. Maybe a neighbor kid being stupid. Eventually, everyone left, and Melissa went to bed. About an hour later, she woke up to the doorbell ringing again, twice. She checked her phone, 1:07 a.m. Her stomach tightened immediately. She called her boyfriend. He answered, sounding drunk and loud from a bar. Once he understood what was happening, his tone changed. "Don't open the door," he told her. She agreed. After they hung up, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, waiting for the feeling in her chest to calm down. That's when she heard it, a faint clicking sound. At first, she thought it was coming from the walls. Then she realized it was coming from the window beside her bed. Click, click, click. Something tapping gently on the glass. A man's voice whispered from outside. "Hello?" Melissa froze. The blinds were closed, but the voice sounded inches away. "Anyone home?" She didn't move. The voice knocked harder. "I know you're home." Her hands started shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone as she called the police. She whispered the entire time while explaining someone was outside her house. The dispatcher told her officers were on the way. 5 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Then loud knocking on the front door. A voice shouted, "Police!" Melissa cautiously approached the door and looked through the glass panel. 2 officers stood on the porch. She opened the door. The taller officer walked inside immediately without asking. The other one stayed near the doorway. They asked questions, looked around outside, and told her they couldn't find anyone. Eventually, they left. Melissa didn't feel better, but the house was quiet again. She locked the doors and went back to bed. The next morning, everything seemed normal. That night, she went to a friend's Halloween party and stayed out late. When she returned home around 1:30 a.m., something felt wrong immediately. The house was cold, not just cool, cold like a window had been left open all day. She walked into the kitchen and noticed the back window was open. She was certain she hadn't left it that way. She closed it and started toward the hallway when she noticed something else. The basement door was open. She always kept that door closed. A faint clicking sound echoed from below. Click, click, click. The exact same sound she had heard at the bedroom window the night before. Melissa walked slowly to the top of the basement stairs. The basement lights were off. Just a black rectangle descending into darkness. The clicking stopped. Silence filled the house. Then a voice spoke from the darkness below. Soft, calm. "You're finally home." Melissa slammed the basement door shut so hard the walls shook. She ran outside barefoot, grabbed her phone and pounded on her neighbor's door until he answered. Together, they called the police again, and again the same 2 officers arrived. This time, they searched the entire house, every closet, every room, every corner of the basement. They found nothing, no broken locks, no footprints, no sign anyone had been inside. But one thing bothered Melissa for weeks afterward. When the officers were leaving, the taller one paused at the front door and looked back at her. His expression had changed. He didn't look annoyed anymore. He looked uneasy. He asked her one quiet question. "Mom," when the voice spoke from the basement, Melissa nodded slowly. "What did it sound like?" She hesitated before answering. "Like the man who knocked on my window." The officer swallowed. Then he said something she still remembers word for word. "That's strange." Melissa asked why. The officer glanced toward the basement door and said quietly, "Because when we searched down there earlier tonight, we heard someone knocking from the inside." A week after Melissa told me her story, I couldn't stop thinking about one detail. The clicking. It showed up in her bedroom window first, then again from the basement, like something was testing different entry points, glass, door frames, vents, whatever it could use. It didn't feel like a random creep story anymore. It felt patterned, like a ritual. That's when I made the mistake of trying to connect things that shouldn't connect. I texted Clarissa for the first time in months. We hadn't really talked since the flute night, not because we hated each other, more because that memory sat between us like a locked door. I asked her one simple question: do you remember any other sound that night? She took hours to respond. When she finally did, it was just one sentence. Before the flute started, I heard a soft tapping like fingernails on glass. My throat went dry reading that, because I hadn't heard that part. Or maybe I had, and my brain deleted it. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. Lots of creepy stories include window tapping. Lots of people hear things at night and fill in blanks with fear. That's what a rational person tells themselves. But after I read her message, I started remembering something I hadn't wanted to remember. Something I'd never even told Clarissa because it sounded too insane. When we first stopped on that off-road trail, right before the flute began, I remember feeling a pressure in my ears, like standing too close to a loudspeaker, except there wasn't any loud sound yet. Then I remember the tiniest, faintest noise, a light clicking sound, not a knock, not a tap, more like a fingernail lightly flicking glass, 3 times. At the time I assumed it was a branch hitting something, but there was no wind, and it wasn't the sound of wood. It was sharp, deliberate, like someone counting. After that text exchange, I did what every sleep-deprived, anxiety-fueled person does at 3 a.m. I Googled. I went down rabbit holes. I searched flute in the woods at night. I searched OP Schnabel flute. I searched hospital elevator old man security shirt. I searched clicking at window police rude officer. It wasn't that I found a perfect match. It was worse than that. I found fragments, similar notes in different places. People describing the same style of encounter, music where music shouldn't be, a figure that appears between rooms, tapping that sounds like it's not coming from outside but from the wrong side of the glass, voices that don't match faces, and a sensation that the air itself is listening. Most of them were written off as mental health, drugs, or exhaustion, and I'm not saying that's never the case, but one thread, buried on an old forum, made my stomach drop so hard I had to sit up in bed. A guy claimed he was a park ranger in Texas years ago. He described finding a small patch of woods where hikers refused to go at night. He said the reason was a sound test, a flute or whistle melody that played in perfect rhythm, but always seemed to come from whichever direction you were trying to escape. He said people thought it was a prankster until he found the evidence, not footprints, not instruments. Evidence like a spot where the ground looked scuffed in a circle, like something had been dragged around, and small scratches on tree bark at shoulder height, like someone had scraped a hard object along it repeatedly. He called it marking. What stuck with me most wasn't the flute part. It was his final sentence. If you hear the tune and you run, you're just teaching it where you go. I didn't sleep much after that, and then, because the universe loves timing, Caleb called me one night, close to midnight. His voice sounded tight and embarrassed, like he didn't want to say what he was about to say. He told me he hadn't seen the old man again, but he had started hearing the elevator chime in places where there was no elevator. A soft ding in the house, a ding from inside his car while driving, a ding behind him while standing at the sink. He said he even heard it in the middle of a grocery store aisle when he was alone at the far end, like someone had pressed a call button on a floor that didn't exist. He tried to tell himself it was stress. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. He told me his hospital had security cameras in the pharmacy area, and he finally worked up the nerve to ask a supervisor to pull footage from the night the old man rode the elevator. The supervisor thought he was joking, but agreed, mostly to prove to him he was just exhausted. They watched the footage together. Caleb said the camera angle showed the hallway outside the elevator doors on the first floor. It showed Caleb step into frame. It showed him hit the button and stand there. Then the elevator doors opened. Caleb stepped back, like he was letting someone out. He reacted exactly like he described to me, but the footage showed something else. No one stepped out. No security guard. No old man. Nothing. Caleb still flinched, still turned his head, still leaned slightly like someone passed close enough to brush his shoulder. Then the doors closed again, and the elevator display above the doors climbed on its own. 2, 3, 4. Caleb stood there watching it, terrified. The supervisor stared at him, confused. Caleb said he felt like the room was spinning. He asked them to rewind. They replayed it twice. Same thing. The elevator moved. Caleb reacted, but no person was visible. The supervisor tried to lighten the mood and said, "Maybe the camera doesn't pick up inside the cab." Caleb pointed at the angle. "No," he said. "That's outside. If someone got on, we'd see them." The supervisor didn't laugh after that. They checked a second camera, one facing the elevator bank from a different hallway angle. Same result. Caleb reacted to someone who wasn't there. And then the supervisor said something that made Caleb go quiet for a long time. Apparently, earlier that month, an overnight nurse had filed a weird complaint. She claimed an older security guard had been standing in the 5455 windows at night, staring down toward the parking lot. Security records showed no guard assigned to that wing. They assumed she was tired. They assumed she was overworked. They never investigated until Caleb asked. That call messed me up more than I wanted to admit, because it introduced a possibility I didn't like. What if the old man wasn't a man at all? What if it was more like a placeholder, a shape your brain uses to make sense of something that doesn't want to be seen clearly? A uniform, a badge, a smile. Something you'd accept for half a second before your instincts scream. 2 days after that call, I got another message from Clarissa. She said she'd had a nightmare about the flute. In the dream, she was back on the trail, but the trees were closer together, like the woods were closing in. She said she couldn't find the main path, and she kept hearing the melody right over her shoulder. She described trying to turn around to see who was playing, but every time she turned, the sound moved, always staying just out of view. Then she said she saw something in the dream that scared her more than the flute. A man standing at the edge of the trail, an older man, wearing a security uniform, watching her. She said he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. He just stood there like he belonged to the woods. I didn't respond right away. My fingers hovered over the keyboard because I didn't want to feed the fear, but I couldn't ignore how the same shape kept appearing across these stories. The same type of presence. The same refusal to be pinned down. Then Melissa texted in our group chat that same weekend. It was the first time she'd brought up her incident since it happened. She wrote, "This is going to sound insane, but I found something behind the basement door frame." I asked what. She sent a picture. It was a shallow scratch line, almost like someone had dragged a small metal object along the wood. 3 parallel marks, not deep, not obvious unless you were looking for them. They were right at about chest height. Melissa wrote, "I never noticed these before. They weren't there when we moved in." I stared at the photo too long, because I'd seen marks like that before, not in my house, not in a hospital, in the park. When I went back the next day, yes, I went back, in daylight, there was a tree near the off-road trail where the bark looked scraped in neat, thin lines. At the time, I assumed it was a kid carving something. Now I wasn't sure. That night, I did something I regret. I went outside around 2:40 a.m. and sat in my truck in my driveway with the engine off. I told myself it was just to prove to myself I could, to prove I wasn't letting a story control me. I sat there in the dark, watching the street. I didn't want to see anything. I didn't want to hear anything. I just wanted my brain to calm down. At 3:17 a.m., a time that means nothing to me, a time I hadn't been thinking about, I heard a sound that didn't belong in my truck. A soft, clean click, like a fingernail tapping glass. Once, then again, then a third time. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe properly. I stared at the windshield. The street was empty, no movement, no headlights, just the faint glow of a street lamp far down the curve of the road. Then, so softly it almost felt imagined, I heard the beginning of a melody. Not loud, not outside, not coming through a window. It sounded like it was Inside the cab, with me, tucked into the corners where sound shouldn't sit. A flute, 3 notes, 4 notes, the same rhythm I remembered, and I realized something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't starting near me, it was starting as if it was testing whether I could still hear it. I didn't wait. I turned the key and started the engine so fast I almost snapped it. The headlights flooded the driveway. Nothing was there. I reversed hard and backed into the street, tires chirping on the pavement, and drove until I hit a main road, then drove more, refusing to look in my mirrors for too long. I didn't go home until sunrise, and when I finally did, the first thing I noticed wasn't anything paranormal. It was something small and physical. My passenger side window had a thin smear on it, like skin oil, like someone had pressed their fingers against the glass from the outside, right at the height where someone sitting in the passenger seat would rest their hand. 3 faint streaks, parallel, like marks. I stood there staring at them while the morning light brightened, and I realized the scariest part wasn't the flute or the tapping. It was the idea that whatever this was didn't need the park, didn't need the hospital, didn't need Melissa's basement. It only needed one thing, a moment when you're alone, tired and listening. Because once you hear it clearly enough, it learns how you hear, and after that, you don't really get to decide where it shows up.